How do you design an end-to-end ecosystem-based procurement operating model? Well, that's the question we'll be asking over the course of this special 4-part series, Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement in partnership with WNS Denali. And in each episode, we'll speak with WNS Denali experts to discuss the basics of an ecosystem approach and then dig into specifics across category management, source to contract, and procure to pay processes. In this fourth and final episode, I'm joined by Sushant Adhikari and Sanjeev Singh, both directors of capabilities and solutions at WNS Denali. And in this episode, we're going to focus on the procure to pay process. And so let's start, Sushant. If I can ask you really a couple of questions combined into one here. One, I'd like to just understand how you're defining what procure to pay entails, and how does that tie back to the ecosystem approach that we've talked about in this series so far?
Sure, Phil. So, if you ask me, procure to pay is the process of integrating your purchasing and accounts payable processes. Essentially, that covers the entire process from your point of order right through the payment, with obviously help of end-to-end systems that help you create greater efficiencies. The process is also known as sometimes as P2P, referred to as
Mm.
purchase to pay and procure to pay, and so on and so forth. But what it entails is three or four key areas, including requisitioning, okay, looking for uh, goods and services to purchase, receiving of those goods and services, and ensuring that your payments have been done to respective suppliers on time as per the required quantity. So, if you really look at this process in context of the larger ecosystem, traditionally this process has been looked upon as more tactical or referred to as a fulfillment function.
Mhm.
But nowadays, what's happening is there's a lot of emphasis on data, and what it means is your procure to pay process essentially holds the cream of data, or all the transactions that you essentially work around on spending. And that data then, if your data is good and that data feeds back into your upstream processes that help you make better decision making and eventually helping the overall ecosystem, how you do deal with your business users, how you deal with your suppliers, and so on and so forth, ensuring that there's a more collaborative way of uh, treating the procurement ecosystem as a whole in a very objective manner.
Yeah, it's interesting how procure to pay was previously looked at as being perhaps the area of the procurement continuum where there wasn't so much focus, or this is really a tactical part of the process and not a strategic part of the process, and so it kind of got forgotten sometimes, even though it's of course probably the most important part of the process for a supplier to make sure that they get paid. But what you talked about there is how it's really becoming foundational, because the data that is coming out of this process is actually feeding and driving all the strategic work, and how much more focus needs to be put on procure to pay to make sure you have good data. Because if there's one problem and one challenge that we see from procurement organizations all the time right now, it's the quality of their data, and this is really where it all originates, as you mentioned before. Now, what kind of stakeholders are you typically working with when you are looking at designing a procure to pay or a purchase to pay delivery and operating model?
Yeah, so a few key stakeholders, right? Um, as you are aware, traditionally, finance as an organization would be holding your procure to pay function, and they would be closely working on it. In some instances, there wasn't a procure to pay function at all, it was just payments, ensuring that your suppliers who you're leveraging for services are being paid. But finance becomes your key stakeholder, and understanding a lot of nuances that arise from the upstream and downstream synergies is going to be critical. So, finance, then the second set of stakeholders is all your business users or requisitioners, you may call it, or budget owners. Understand the pain points, the usability aspect of how they leverage the procure to pay services, and third and most importantly, your suppliers. And these are the stakeholders that you normally may forget when you talk about day-to-day transactions, but if you
Mm-hmm.
deal with them strategically, it really turns out into greater value that your organization can get. And again, coming back to data, right? Data is very important. Even data from suppliers that come back to you is going to be critical. So these three functions essentially help you, you help your organization ecosystem to be more fulfilling.
What are some of the common pain points or points of failure that you see when you're looking at um, procure to pay processes and organizations where they, something isn't working, they're looking to improve? Are there some common reasons why you see that happening?
Mhm. Yeah, we have seen a lot of these across our clients, and there are more common pain points across most of our clients. But over the past 2 to 3 years, what we have seen is there's been a clear classification based on how a client's P2P organization has matured.
Hmm.
Uh, while I mentioned that, let me just uh, bring back or touch upon the key challenges that we have seen. So, if you really look at it, traditionally the challenges have been around high cost of operations,
Yeah.
uh, low level of compliance across procurement policies or processes, elimination and the reason to detask uh, your tactical or transactional work as organizations keep growing. And beyond that, there are still key drivers which help an organization look beyond what the tactical or transactional P2P organization needs to function. But while some organizations are still grappling with establishing a standard process and compliance or looking at lowering the turnaround times, some of these early outsourcing adopters have grown considerably, and they have lived through these various outsourcing phases. Now they're looking at next level of P2P efficiency improvements and so on and so forth. But what's happening, Phil, here is in a rush to automate or transform and get aligned to the overall organizational growth stories, there's been challenges which are getting back related to the same compliance issues, same issues related to contracted savings realizations, compliance to policies, and more regulatory compliance requirements that's coming and pushed on these industries and organizations. So the traditional pain points have gone in a way, but they still persist and come back while organizations are trying to innovate and transform themselves to adapt to the larger
Mhm.
dynamics in the market.
So, how are you seeing organizations overcome some of these, and look at these challenges as things to address? Like, how are they addressing them? What are some of the most common ways of doing that?
Oh, absolutely. Very pertinent question when it comes to P2P. And the most important aspect of it is uh, ensuring that you have a organization that focuses on digital transformation,
Yeah.
because all these organizations are trying to ensure that they enable every transactions to be touchless. And there are multiple ways to do it, right? How do you do it? But there's a basic mantra. So you need to treat transformation based on the premise that every change is sequential, because it's the most touched process in the entire source to pay organization process value chain. So that has to be sequential, well thought up, and then each component of that digital infusion or transformation needs to either address a gap or create additional value.
Hmm.
So what happens after that is essentially helps you ensure that the change that follows is pretty seamless, and there's a lot of value that gets back to your stakeholders very seamlessly. Uh, while I said that, we always believe in advising our clients on optimizing their technology investments and helping them generate more value through a set of point solutions or products and tools that can enable them to get that journey. And what
Hmm.
we have seen in the past, or rather in the past couple of years or so, there are a few products or digital enablers that have grown in the market. I'll just like to mention a few here.
Yeah.
The topmost that comes to my mind is uh, the growth of virtual agents, right? The AI element of it, machine learning, cognitive, that has made those virtual agents pretty seamlessly integrated into the entire P2P process. And the real base for that is obviously your data. If your data is not clean and not on time, the virtual agents may stop functioning after a certain point in time. But that's made real time information available to your various stakeholders. Uh, the another important aspect is your hyper automation, or what you call it, low code, no code,
Hmm.
beyond your RPA automation. So that's another way of looking at ensuring that your latest and greatest platforms are providing a seamless experience, end-to-end automation at the same time. A couple of more elements, Phil, here would I like to mention is specialized tools focusing on elements like PO collaboration, change management, which now can be automated through infusion of such tools, which traditionally was not. And then most important is looking at it from a business standpoint, where you ensure that there's more value to be delivered through effective utilization, rather implementation and utilization of catalog or any other buying channels.
I feel that talking about digital transformation in the P2P process is probably worthy of its own podcast, with the amount of different kind of innovations that you're seeing, and that you're actually seeing not just at early stages come to market, but we're actually making a difference now. Those are maturing technologies that really any organization can use. Sanjeev, I want to bring you in and just ask if there's anything that you've seen that can also help the companies overcome some of the pain points that we discussed around the P2P process.
While Sushant has covered most of the digital aspects, and where we can bring virtual agents and automation, I would want to talk about more human aspects of it. We need to also invest in talent in a different way going forward in a P2P process, depending upon how a particular organization is set to transform their P2P and where they are in technology journey. It depends upon what kind of investment they make in talent. So if they are embarking upon a journey which is creating a lot of content, say for catalogs or for price lists and all others, the talent needs to be uh, adaptive to building that content. It is this talent who would be required to build that content, analyze that information, create that data, and uh, be able to put it through. So if there is a process which is being automated, the talent needs to understand the process, all the workforce which are behind it. They need to also make sure that they are able to split the process into things which can be automated and areas which needs some judgmental or decision making which is dependent upon human. So there are other aspects like analyzing the data, bringing that data back to the upstream processes so that it feeds into that uh, sourcing process or category management strategy, etc. So it becomes very important that we invest in talent and change the way we are investing in talent depending upon how we are growing in our technology journey.
Sushant, what are some of the nuances you look for when you're designing a P2P operating model for a client?
Yeah, so Phil, I think P2P as a function, and we touched upon it in a couple of responses earlier, it's evolved from being a pure fulfillment function. So now it's looked upon as a value creation one. But there are still organizations who have not yet set up their P2P function, leave alone the outsourcing part of it. And we have helped them do that. So first and foremost, need to understand what's the core objective of a particular client organization in terms of creating a P2P organization or improving or transforming a P2P organization. However, that said, what organizations today are looking for is either ensuring that there's operationally they are optimal in terms of costs. At the same time, they ensure that there's a timely delivery of all the orders that are placed with seamless interaction and feedback mechanism in place. for their stakeholders. But they are gaining importance towards moving towards 100% compliant, zero leakage, fully automated process, where there is an end-to-end transaction visibility, and that data can create intelligent analytics that can feed upstream, downstream both. And while doing that, there's also an element of how can I add value through optimizing my savings, say looking at tail spend, right? So
Mhm.
managing my tail spend strategically. So there's multiple elements here, Phil, but it's been a completely transformational story from a solutioning standpoint over the past 3 years or so. And that has been really fulfilling in bringing new solutions to the game for various clients across the globe.
And Sushan, just to kind of wrap up today's episode, I wonder if there's any tips that you could share that we haven't covered today that would help any listener who's looking at really either reinvigorating their P2P process or starting from scratch in the building of a more formal process. Anything that would help them on their way to build a successful and a kind of a growth oriented function.
Definitely, Phil. And I bet you may start referring to me as the 3 point mantra guru after I mention this. But essentially, what I would recommend is for the listeners is to look at moving towards zero touch P2P operations.
Hmm.
And it cannot be day one, right? But there has to be some start. And to ensure that we enable that, there's three key points that you should focus on. Focus on fixing the leakages. Okay, there's a process in place. You might be doing it well, but there still would be leakages. So focus on doing that. Second is focus on driving incremental savings. Look at value beyond what you're delivering from the process. And the third and most important aspect is never lose sight of the integrated source to pay ecosystem, because there's a lot of feedback that goes up, comes back, and helps improve your process in turn.
Thanks for listening in to today's episode, part of our 4 podcast series called Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement in partnership with WNS Denali. To listen back to the entire series, go to artofprocurement.com/ecosystem series. That's all one word. That's artofprocurement.com/ecosystem